All right, welcome. Today we're talking about diversity in science. But first, let's take a look at this image that we see here, and I want you to think like, what is this used for? What is this used for? Or what could that be used for? Answer is this was used in medicine in Native American culture of kind of like aspirin. It's like a pain reliever, fever reducer. And that's what we're talking about today as we talk about physical science, which is the study of matter, energy, and how they interact, or non-living things. One of the pieces that we're going to talk about is that there's a myth in science, and it relates back to that piece of willow bark. So what do scientists do? They do lots of things, but there's 4 ideas here. They investigate, they plan experiments, they observe, and they test the results of those observations. And what I would like you to do is, as needed, pause the video and be able to write these things down. So the red text is going to tell you, it's going to follow along with the notes, the blanks here. It's going to follow along with the blanks here. So scientists assume certain things about the universe. Okay? And in order to make sure that everybody, quote unquote, plays by the same rules, they do this. So a practical example is if there's the Twins and a Japanese baseball team, it'd be hard to compare their wins and losses because if they had a different amount of runs scored for each home run. So like an example, a home run is 1 run scored unless there's people on base. But in Japan, if each home run counted for 5 runs, that would change the outcomes of games. Even though they're playing baseball, the rules would be different. So there's a systematic way that we investigate. And the rules that we live by in our world are discovered by that. So let's talk about science generally now. It says any knowledge gained by observing events or the world around you in order to discover the facts and ideas that can be tested. And there's many different branches of science. For example, biological sciences, study of living things. Physical science is a study of matter and energy, and earth science is a study of the earth, atmosphere, and weather. Again, pause if you need to in order to take the notes. So technology is the application of science for practical purpose. So an example of that would be, say you're measuring weather, and you need to develop a tool that will help you determine how hot or cold it is outside. Well, the thermometer is a piece of technology that allows you to determine certain things about the weather. That would be an application of science for a practical purpose. And some scientists pursue science simply to determine and further scientific knowledge. So an example, when I was in college, I worked in a lab, and our lab eventually was hoping to lead to treatment, but in the meantime, we were just pursuing knowledge so that we could understand the world around us better. So scientists and engineers practice the applied science for practical applications, and that's the development of technology. So technology is a result of science. So that the iPad you're watching this on, or the cell phone you're watching this on, those things are all developed because of research, because of scientific pursuit. So let's talk about diversity in science now. So let's review a little bit. Why science? What's important about science? So science, remember, is observing, studying, experimenting to find how things exist. And why do we do it? It helps us understand the world around us works, and it helps us to develop technology. So in your mind right now, and this is where you're going to take notes, I want you to think of, when you hear the word scientist, what do you think of? Just write down the images in your mind. You might think of lab coats, or computers, or notebooks, or their intelligence, or chemistry experiments, or something of that nature. Okay, so go ahead, write down whatever came to your mind. And then also in that space, I want you to name a scientist that you know. Name a scientist. Could be any of them. So pause here for a second and write that down. And a few scientists that you might know would be like Newton, Galileo, and Einstein. And there's nothing wrong with these scientists. They all contributed great things to the field of science, but they perpetuate a myth of science. And the myth is this, that all scientists are old white guys. when in fact scientists have been in every culture since the beginning of time. Because remember, science is all about the observation or discovery of the world around you. So every culture has been doing this, whether they're developing the best way to grow and produce crops, or wondering about the stars above them. So the reality is that science is everywhere and done by everyone. And you might not think of it this way, but much of what you do in your daily life is related to science. Example, the light switch, you flip it up and the light doesn't turn on. You have to discover why that isn't happening. So you're problem solving. So you can think of it that way too. So science is everywhere. And the reality is that many different people have always been curious about the way the world works, and they've always been performing experiments about the world around them. And they do experiments in order to do this. Sorry, that should say experiments right there. Or sorry, experimented. No, I was wrong. So let's look at some examples. So again, pause if you need to in order to take the notes. I'm going to talk through it. If you want to hear me talk through it and then take the notes, that's a great way to do it. Or pause here and take the notes and then listen to me. So astronomy, or the study of celestial things. So long before Galileo made his discoveries, cultures have been looking up at the night skies and making discoveries and applying that knowledge to their daily lives. So you take a look at this thing right here. You might be wondering, what is that? That's Galileo's middle finger, which is in a museum. I don't know why, but it is. Okay, but really, like, go back to some prehistoric. I'm sorry, not prehistoric, but some ancient civilizations, such as the Mayans, and they built observatories, and they aligned structures with the movements of the stars and planets. We're looking at, the equinox here. Which is a changing of seasons and so forth. And that meant, like, through these gaps in the stone walls, they're able to observe stars and therefore learn a little bit about their the passing of time. So another example would be Aristarchus of Samos. He predicted the size of the Earth and the size and distance of the sun and moon along astronomical measurements. Which is pretty advanced for his age. And Greeks, though maybe lighter skinned, are not necessarily old white guys, right? And same thing in Chinese culture. They built very significant observatories, and they observed eclipses and things of that nature that were very important. And if you've had any experience here, you know that many aspects of their culture are built around celestial things. And next, agriculture. So we're talking about, like, plants. Scientists believe that the corn plant that we have today was developed from a very basic one. So you look at the difference between teosinte and early maize, and they crossbred these things and developed the corn that we have today, or the early point of that, and then we've progressed that as culture and society forward more. And they also, in the Middle East, had very significantly developed agricultural practices, such as irrigation and drainage, conservation, sanitation, and they planted and harvested plants that had been wild. They developed farms, right? And that's a pretty significant development in the production of food. In medicine, you think back up to the willow bark, but all over the world for thousands of years, people use plants and other natural items to cure headaches, backaches, mend cuts, etc. So, and this is where we're coming back to the bark of the willow, where Native Americans used it to alleviate all kinds of aches, kind of like aspirin. And some people still use that today. Which is an important thing to note, is that there are natural remedies for things that we have very produced pieces for. And lastly, women in science. So you don't often think of women as scientists, and honestly, for a long period of time, there might not have been quite as many. But there's an assumption that women can't do science, and that actually is categorically false, right? There are many women who have contributed to science, such as Marie Curie. She pioneered the study of radioactive elements, right? And even though her husband got most of the credit at first because people would respect it if it came from a man more, it's actually her. She was the one who pushed that research forward. And in China, the first empress of China, she devised a process to produce silk at a really high level, at kind of like a mass production, so like factory type of thing, in order to get a ton of it, which was a widely considered really high level fabric, and still is. And Grace Murray Hooper, she invented the compiler, which translates English instructions into computer code. So without her, all this that we're doing right now, this distance learning, wouldn't really be a thing. So we have her to thank for the fact that we have much of the technology that we have today. So remember that science is everywhere. It's done by all types of people in all places, and you don't have to be a fancy, educated person in order to do it. Anyone can really do it. So take a moment here. Your homework is to finish these sentence stems. The myth of science is blank. The reality is blank. One example of diversity in science that disproves this myth is blank. Another example is blank. And then lastly, finish or fill in the blanks here. They don't have to be that length specifically, but when I think of science, I used to think blank, but now I think of blank. So think about the change from myth to reality. And once you finish that, make sure you upload your notes back to Schoology and the Notability Entry 1, Unit 1 assignment so that I can give you points. Thanks.